Welcome, everybody, to Cycle Jerks Podcast, episode 128. I'm your host, Mike Stewart, joined today as always, with the currently still retired Dave Dalton.
Unemployed.
Okay, unemployed.
Yeah, I'd like to say retired, but I'm unemployed.
And today's guest, we're very honored to have with us the very accomplished Massimo Alpian from Ride for Racial Justice. And Massimo, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we first learned about the Ride for Racial Justice through a previous guest, McCasey Duncan. And, I kind of looked into it. It looks like coming out of pandemic I had never heard of it before. I'm in the cycling industry, and I was surprised when McCasey was telling me about it. And it sounded like a really great program. And obviously McCasey's great. So can you talk about what led up to the development of it and how it all came to be?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm based here in Boulder, in Colorado, as are other founders of Ride for Racial Justice. The organization was founded in the midst of the summer of 2020. So we were in the middle of a pandemic, right? And also after the murder of George Floyd is really what brought us together and started the organization. Marcus Robinson, our co-founder, along with Neil Henderson, wanted to put something together to bring the community together, which it was a tough time, right? People were still really concerned about coming together. We were in the middle of a pandemic. Could you bring a whole bunch of people together in a ride that highlighted the need to address what was going on in the country at that time and what has historically happened and where we need to go in the future. So in June 2020, Marcus and Neil, our co-founders, based here in Colorado, like I said, came together and wanted to put together an advocacy ride that brought the community together. I was a part of that first ride, not as a board member. I showed up as a member of the community. And obviously because I'm an advocate and an activist, and I wanted to be out there showing up, also as a person of color. And I was so surprised because one, we thought maybe like 30, maybe 20 people would show up. And I think we had almost about 250 cyclists show up.
Wow.
Yeah. It was pretty, apocalyptic. We're all in masks, we're all distancing, right? We still didn't know what to do. Vaccines were out. It was June 2020. But we figured it out, and it was really moving. It was really powerful to see that many people show up and care. And we had a lot of difficult and poignant conversations on the bike and off the bike in Denver, which is where we hosted the ride. And it sparked an idea from there of Marcus and Neil reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you like to join the board? You've been doing some work in this space," which we'll get to, but I historically have done work in the cycling and the outdoor industry, regarding, diversity, equity, inclusion. So they extended an offer for me to join the board and see how I could help. And then from there, a larger movement happened, where we saw places where we could make an impact. Steamboat Gravel and the program we did there, which McCasey was a part of, and a few other areas which we could cover. And, now almost 4 years later, I look back and this grassroots organization, this thing that was just a small idea in the sky has grown into something so much bigger and has impacted so many people and inspired so many people, and also has been a model that has been replicated for change at other races, at other cycling events, and also other events outside of the cycling space that have adopted the model we brought to Steamboat Gravel, which we could chat about.
Yeah.
It started just as like an idea. I mean, it wasn't Ride for Racial Justice. Was the original event, or it was just like, hey, I've got this idea, and it was because of the turnout. Now it just blossomed from there.
Yeah, it blossomed from there. You know, first ride we did was literally called the Ride for Racial Justice.
Oh, okay.
And yeah,
That's
and
that's
then
where I was going. Okay.
it was born from there. And I think seeing the impact we could create, the amount of people that showed up obviously inspired us in the conversations we had that day.
Yeah.
And then also, you know, we had thrown out some ideas to Amy Charity at Steamboat Gravel. And some of those conversations were happening in the background post that first ride. So it really did just start off as this like really grassroots idea, which I think a lot, which in my opinion is often how change happens, right?
Yeah.
Usually starts off on a real micro level as this small grassroots idea. If you look at different movements over time, you know, the civil rights movement, larger movements, and sure, we're still pretty small in the grand scheme of the world, but I do feel like we've made such a great impact, particularly in the United States, so nationally. So yeah, to answer your question, it started off as something really grassroots, really small, and has grown into something way bigger than we ever thought it would.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's clearly like you said on a just throwing it out there as a group ride and then seeing the turnout. It's just like, wow, we're really onto something here. This is speaking to people's hearts and minds, and maybe there's more that could be done. And you guys have really taken the ball and run with it. So with it,
Question on that first event. This is I don't know. I mean, was it a fairly diverse crowd, or that the support came from a diverse crowd, or just people of color,
or was it a bunch of old white guys like most of the group rides?
There were definitely a bunch of old white guys, but that's great because, you know, I think
Yeah.
it was a diverse crowd. And honestly, like, you know, over time, over the past 3.5 years, you know, we've seen each ride brings a different crowd depending on, you know, geography, the location. You know, we do have probably, I'd say, the most diverse and representative crowd show up during our Denver rides. You know, Denver happens to be, you know, probably one of the most diverse cities, right, in Colorado. Colorado isn't the most diverse place to begin with.
For sure.
You know, and then obviously you come to a place like Boulder, definitely less diversity. So, you know, a majority white crowd. But, you know, that's great because, you know, if there are individuals that we can bring on from, you know, the non-BIPOC community, you know, what for all intents and purposes, you know, white individuals, and have difficult conversations, raise awareness, and inspire them to be a part of the change through allyship, then we're doing something really good.
And then that's exactly why I asked the question.
Yeah.
It's not, then it becomes, it's not an us and them thing, right? It's
Right.
like you're getting support from all, from all over and from all different backgrounds and cultures and whatnot. So I think that could you do me a favor, just define BIPOC? You just mentioned it. I mean, I've did some background research, but for our audience, you know, Ride for Racial Justice includes what?
Oh yeah, so, you know, our focus is on the BIPOC community, which it stands for the Black, Indigenous, and POC, person of color community. So that spans, you know, so many different, you know, ethnic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, and nationalities. So it's been really great, but our work is also intersectional. So what I mean by that is, you know, we do focus on, you know, the experience of BIPOC individuals who are women, who come from the queer community, who come from all walks of life, right? Because it's, no one's in a box. You know, we are all intersectional in so many different ways through our identities and how we identify and who we are. So I hope that helps identify what our mission is and what we focus on for sure.
Right.
So how many of these rides do you put on? Is it like a regular monthly, weekly, and is it just in Colorado, or are they across the country?
That's a good question. So our rides are mainly focused here in Colorado. We've had the opportunity to take the Ride for Racial Justice awareness rides and community rides outside of the state. Particularly, we've done that with Steamboat Gravel and Amy Charity there, which has been great. So for example, we did one in Texas, which was super cool, and had such a great turnout. But 99.9% of all our rides happen in Colorado. They start in the spring and go throughout the summer into fall. The winters, yes, Colorado winters are good, but they could be harsh sometimes. So we take a break during the winter, but with reason. The winter's really focused on building out our programming and supporting our athletes that are part of the ambassador program we have with Steamboat Gravel. So, to go back to your first question, our rides usually start in April, May, and go into June. We usually celebrate Juneteenth with our inaugural Ride for Racial Justice ride in Denver. That celebrates the anniversary of that first ride in 2020. And then from there, we usually host rides throughout the front range of Colorado. So, Boulder, Fort Collins, Colorado Springs, and do sort of a tour throughout the front range as we build up to Steamboat with our other programming that's focused on the ambassador program we have with Steamboat Gravel, which I can dive into as well.
Yeah. The Steamboat, it's been something that both Dave and I have wanted to do, and we haven't made it out there yet, but
you got to do it. It's so much fun. Yeah. Man, Steamboat Gravel is a blast. It's a blast.
Yeah, we've talked about this on the show, is that it is by far, anyone that's done it says it's the best gravel event. But I also did want to comment, you did have an impact. There's a local woman that did it, and she got in. I mean, it's lottery, so she got in by virtue of the fact that she and her boyfriend formed a team.
Right.
So because they got in as a team, and after the event, I was riding with her, and she's like, "Yeah, there was a couple of teams there. There was us. There was this, and then she goes, and there was this group, Ride for Racial Justice." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know." So we had McCassie on. So the point being, somehow the visibility or awareness was there because it made an impact on her. So
yeah. Maybe I should jump in and talk a bit about the program if that helps. Yeah, and how that came about. So, maybe I'll take a step back and talk a bit about my background.
Let's get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, and because the program is something that I didn't have access to. I'm New York City born and bred child of immigrants. And cycling was not something the community I came from had access to. It's not something my parents really knew a lot about from their background, And
where in New York City?
I grew up in Brooklyn and Queens.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where were your folks from originally?
From South America and the Middle East.
Okay. Wow. Yeah.
So it's interesting because, you look at a community where I live now in Boulder, and I'm like, there's so many cycling programs for youth.
Yeah.
And that's how we see the next racers, the next industry leaders, the next marketers of the cycling industry come about. And what sparks to me change happens systemically, and also institutionally and organizationally. And the community I came from, the schools didn't have cycling programs. There were no youth teams. There were no Devo programs. And obviously I had to find my own journey into bikes and cycling, and figuring out what that meant to me, how to make it work, how to get my first bike, how to learn my skills on my bike, how to make that happen in a city. And I'm not alone on that journey. There's a lot of individuals that have been part of the Ride for Racial Justice program that come from communities where cycling is not something that you have access to. It's something that, you know, a community has to invest to, schools have to invest into. And, you know, when we looked at
Well, how did you find the bike?
I mean, I actually have like really vivid memories of as a kid, you know, begging like my mom to get me my first bike, you know, and having my parents save up for them for it. And finally they did. And I have like really vivid memories of my mom on her busy street in New York. Um, you know, she had no idea how to like work a bike, but you know, she knew that like, you know, a bike needed training wheels and um and we'd find a little quiet spot to help practice riding. And those were where I remember some of my first vivid memories of being on a bike. I also have memories of my dad really pushing me to play soccer, which was something I still love. I think soccer is a beautiful game, right? It is the
It
most
is.
beautiful game to watch. But I just really wanted to like ride a bike. You know, I wasn't really interested in, you know, I found myself having like athletic ability naturally, which was great. My brother was a big soccer player and went down that route. And I just really wanted to ride bikes. I was fascinated by them. I thought they were really cool. So that was like the first memory I had of begging my parents as much, you know, as hard as they were working and as little money as we had to get me that first bike.
I
Go
don't.
ahead. Yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I don't. To put this in context, I don't think some people will grasp this, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm from. I spent a lot of time. I lived on Long Island for a long time, so I spent a lot of time in New York. Was back visiting. We were staying in New York, and we got on. I think we were on the FDR Drive, and We're actually
Yeah.
leaving the city, and I never forget. We're stuck in traffic, and I looked over, and there was a guy. Naturally there's a basketball court, right? On in some housing complex there. So there's a basketball court, and there's a dad teaching his kid how
Mm.
to ride in the basketball court, right? And it's like it struck me how different that is, because I would just walk out. My dad taught me in the middle of my street, right? And growing up, you can't, or on the sidewalk, you can't do that in New York City. So it's a big
Yeah.
deal. It's really a big deal. And as people that love cycling, that there's it to deprive them of that ability, or that's not, may not be the right word, but it's just not. What are you going to do? Learn on the sidewalk of Manhattan, right? It's a tough
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Good luck.
No, you're 100%, you know, you're 100% right on that. You know, it's right. And you do see that down still to this day, right? You know, just even talking about cycling infrastructure,
Yeah.
you know, that you see that investment from wealthier communities. Wealthier communities tend to be more white. And
Yeah.
right, you come to a place like Boulder and we have such great cycling infrastructure. You know, there's bike lanes everywhere. The city was literally built around bike lanes, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You go to any of the schools, there's robust cycling programs, youth cycling programs. There's teams for any kid to join, but it's an extremely wealthy and extremely white community. And that's not an anomaly. That's the commonality that weaves this story together.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think for me, I found my journey, you know, especially as I entered high school, of like, I just really want to ride bikes. And,
Mhm.
you know, it's an interesting story because it weaves in how I got into the bike industry. But, you know, bikes carried with me throughout, you know, my whole life as I lived in New York City and grew up in New York City and into college, which I went to school in New York too. So I stayed in New York pretty much my whole life,
Mhm.
through grad school. Um, I loved, you know, riding bikes. I loved racing bikes into my 20s. You know, it was a really cool time too, because that's when like the New York City crit scene was like really taking off in the
Mhm.
2000s. And then yeah, you had like Red Hook and everything was just like
Yeah.
coming into
Yeah, yeah,
especially
yeah.
into the 2010s. And then it's funny enough, I met my husband in my present husband, but at the time, just met him. We were dating in 2006, and um, bikes were really cool because it's kind of like what also we had in common. That I didn't, I was dating at the time. I didn't meet like a lot of guys that I was going out on dates with that were really interested in bikes, but he happened to have a mountain bike, which I thought was weird in a place like New York City to have a mountain
Yeah.
bike. But I was like, oh, this guy's cool. Um, so one of our first dates was going on a ride together, which was really, really great. And
Yeah.
it was funny, we were on a road ride, and me being a roadie, I like dropped him pretty quickly. And
Yeah.
then, you know, plus I had like no idea, one, I never really rode mountain bikes. I didn't know how to because no access, right? I'd have to go upstate or New England to do that and get out of the city. And then one of our later dates, we went, he was like, oh, we should go upstate and maybe bring some bikes with us to upstate New York. So we went up to the Catskills, and that's when he dropped me because I had no idea what I was doing on a mountain bike. It
Yeah.
was like maybe like my second time in my life on a mountain bike, and I was
Right,
completely eating shit. It was muddy, there was roots everywhere, like typical East Coast trails. I was just a mess. And I remember being like really embarrassed because he dropped me. I was alone on this trail. I was like screaming his name. I was like, Brett. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy probably is like judging me. Like, this guy has no idea what he's doing.
It might be a little bit of poetic justice. Maybe that's how he was feeling on the road ride too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I was you get what you give. So
Yeah.
Yeah. But let's be honest. I mean, in New York, when you dropped in, there wasn't risk of getting eaten by a bear. I mean, you're out on a trail somewhere, right?
no, there were no, for sure. I haven't even seen that many bears in the Catskills of all the time I've spent up there, but nevertheless, I met him in 2006. I went to grad school. Bikes were still part of my life, stayed in New York City. And my career outside of grad school was focused on the NGO world, the nonprofit world. So I did a lot of work focused on human rights and humanitarian work around the world. It was really deep work, very intense work. The focus of my work was children in armed conflict zones. So like really, really interesting work. The geographic locations I focused on were particularly sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America, and at times the Middle East. And then the financial crisis hit of the late 2000s. Couldn't find work. There was just no money going to nonprofit organizations. I found a few good consultancies, but that only carried me so far. And I was honestly at a loss. I had a ton of student loan debt. I didn't know what to do. So I kind of went back to my roots and my love of bikes and the outdoors. So I walked into EMS, which is Eastern Mountain Sports, which, there's a few locations still left, particularly in Upper New England.
Yeah.
This location was in New York in downtown Manhattan. And I just walked in, I saw that they had an opening for someone to work in their bike and ski department.
Oh my goodness.
So I just walked in, and I said, hey, I don't have a whole lot of retail experience since high school. Would you guys hire me? The one thing I know a lot about is outdoor gear, bikes, and I can learn a bit about skis because I wasn't a big skier, at that time. And they hired me. They took a chance on me. And that's where my career in the bike and outdoor industry started, was at the retail level, which I think all good careers should start from there, because you learn a lot about, just working in a retail environment and what people come in and complain about their bikes or complain about their outdoor gear or whatnot. And you learn people skills too.
Let me just
Yeah.
interject here real quick. So
Yeah.
Eastern Mountain Sports is, you said they took a chance on you.
Yeah.
Did they look at your educational background? Because it's like, you have the education that maybe you could be running the entire organization and you're applying for a job as a bicycle person or a retail clerk, did
Yeah.
anybody call you out on that? Like, hey, what's going on here? Or was it
No,
just,
they did. It definitely came up in that first like interview. I remember
yeah,
sitting downstairs of EMS, which no longer exists at location in Soho in Manhattan. And the manager, her name was Amanda. She was a great, great human being. And she was like, hey, like, you went to NYU and
yeah,
Columbia. Like, why are you doing this? And I was like, look, like I can't find work. Um, I also come from a background where my parents were immigrants and worked hard, and nothing was too above them to do because that's what you had to do to survive when you came to this country.
yeah.
And so I had a really good work ethic of just being like, hey, got to make it work and find work, and whatever it is, And
Hmm.
I also thought to myself of, I did have a moment where I was like, I don't know if I really want to be in the nonprofit world anymore. I want to go into the bike and outdoor industry. I know no one,
Yeah.
it's a very nepotistic industry. And the best place for me to start and sort of like, get my chops is at the retail level. And I did give her my life story and just approached it that way of just being honest and authentic and
Hmm.
and being like, look, I'm gonna work my ass off and this is really what I want. And I love bikes and I love outdoor gear and I just want to learn and be here in this environment. And they did. They took a chance on me because they could have been like, this guy's just going to probably work here for like 3 weeks and quit his job until he finds something else.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
And Moss,
I,
Moss,
yeah,
slow
yeah,
down. I'm writing all this down because I'm out of
yeah.
work right now, and I'm trying to find work in the bike industry. So I'm practicing. I'm going to practice your speech. So I work really.
well,
So
the,
work ethic, work
uh-huh.
ethic.
Well, the
Okay.
thing that I'm struck with too is what you were doing before was such heavy work, I would imagine, in these war-torn areas, working with
Yeah.
children. I mean, I can't imagine some of the stories and some of the things that you were probably privy to in that kind of situation. And you got to believe that there's probably maybe subconsciously, even though you had interest in pursuing it, that door closed and another, and here you go into cycling. This is something you love. It's fun. It's a pretty loose industry and a lot less heaviness on you, as maybe that was part of the decision. Do you think so, looking back
It,
on it?
I think a part of it, yes. I think the work is heavy and at times that's really difficult for a lot of people that work in that space because you do, you're working in these really serious um areas of the world where there's just a lot of devastation. You see the effects of things like colonialism still living to this day
Yeah.
in a lot of these regions. But then you're also like, hey, I'm pretty privileged living in the United States. Um, and why should I feel like this is so heavy on me when these individuals that I'm working with in these communities I'm working with are some of the most devastated in the world. So it's always kind of that like weird balance of giving yourself grace because you're working in this space and you've made a choice to, and the heaviness that can carry, the psychological heaviness of what you see and experience.
Yeah.
And then also balancing that with knowing that the individuals that you're working with are really needing help, and also listening to them of what the type of help they need rather than you prescribing to them the help you think they need.
Yeah.
And I think also too a big part of making that decision was I even though I didn't know anyone in the bike and outdoor industry, I, read a lot of the magazines, I followed the news. I just didn't see a whole lot of initiatives from brands in the social impact space, right? Flash forward to today, every brand is doing social impact work,
Yep.
which is great to see how far we've advanced and how much we've progressed. But I love that. That was really great to
It was kind of cool because
hear.
he just appeared
So
out of nowhere. There was a kiss
Yeah.
and he disappeared. That was wild.
We do that periodically. Now my dog's going to come up here. I'm going to pet my dog too. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Dave has no boundaries at home.
yeah,
it's okay. It's all right.
anything for ratings.
Yeah.
We all need better boundaries.
Yeah.
So yes, back to what I was saying, my mind also went to, could I find a career in marketing with, through just starting off as, a bike tech and a retail clerk,
Yeah.
as a marketer in the outdoor and bike industry that merges social impact with marketing. And now
Yeah.
social impact marketing is like, a buzzword and a buzz term.
For
But
sure.
that's where my
Right.
mind was at. And looking back how many years later, right? A decade, over 13 years later, it worked out, and
Yeah.
from EMS, I got a job at REI. And same space, leading their action sports department, which focused on bike, ski, climb, particularly bike. And then I was able to transfer over to the Boulder store, because I was like, okay, I actually really want to move out west. And so did my partner Brett. He had lived in New York for a while as well. He obviously loves bikes. He loved being outside. He wanted to be closer to the mountains. So, we figured out, like, could we find a way to get out west? And also this might help me launch my career in the bike and outdoor industry.
Hmm.
So I found a way to get into the Boulder REI store. Worked there for about like 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years.
Still
And
as a retail clerk?
retail
Okay.
clerk, bike tech.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
It was mainly focused on bike and ski,
Hmm.
on the retail level. And then I started just finding ways to insert myself in the community here, particularly the bike and outdoor community, jumping into group rides, figuring out the right people to connect with. And I was like, I was right, that it was pretty nepotistic. It's about who you know,
Hmm.
unfortunately, and kind of just enmeshing yourself. And, at times, like, I had a lot of like uh imposter syndrome, because, a lot of these people I was around just, had known each other riding bikes for 15 years, 10 years, grew up together racing bikes, grew up together ski racing. This is stuff I didn't have access to. And I just kind of felt like I was a poser at times showing up to these things, because I'm like, oh, here's this kid from like Brooklyn and Queens who likes to ride bikes fast and is just jumping into these group rides trying to like show myself, So I I felt like I didn't have a lot of confidence, and constantly felt like I was trying to prove something. And yeah, I also didn't see a lot of people that look like me as
Hmm.
well, especially at that time. We're talking 2012 in Boulder, it was very white, and
Yeah.
still is. But
Right.
I didn't see any other like brown guys like on some of these group rides, or even women. And I also didn't meet a lot of other queer cyclists. So I kind of felt like just a fish out of water at times. And,
Sure.
the one level playing field we always had was bikes, and my chops were that I like to race. And I started meeting the right people, and I realized, like, once people got to know me, I actually it was a very welcoming community, and people were super welcoming. And people were really interested in my background and where I was from and how I got into the outdoors and bikes. And then I landed my first marketing gig, at actually a ski and mountaineering brand called Dynafit and Solera
Yeah.
here in Boulder. Yep. So I worked
Mhm.
at Dynafit for a number of years. Really great group of people. And this one guy, Eric Henderson, who managed comms, took a chance on me along with this other guy, Scott Knight. And they were also kind of like, you know, where's this guy coming from? But yeah, at least he has some retail experience. And they did take a chance on me, and I started building my career from there at the brand level. And then from there, it's kind of like a really cool story. It just kind of organically happened where I built my career, met the right people. I landed my next gig at a pretty big PR and marketing agency in the cycling and outdoor space called Backbone Media.
Mhm.
and rigor based up here in the Roaring Fork Valley. Got to work on some great brands there, met a lot of people, and did some really great work. And I'll say, like, Brian Holcomb, who I don't know if you know, took a chance on me. He was also really well known in the cycling space, particularly in Colorado, had a racing background, had written for Velo News for years.
Mhm.
As a kid, I was, and even in my 20s, I was like obsessed with Velo News. So I was really excited to meet him. And he took a chance on me too at that first agency job I had. And then I landed my next agency job at that agency I mentioned earlier. For everyone that doesn't know, it's an agency based in Sausalito, in Marin County in the Bay Area. Got to
Mhm.
work on some cool accounts from like Brompton Bikes to Camelback. Um, and then from there, I landed my first in-house bike industry job at Cannondale, heading global PR. And then my last role there was global brand director. Uh, that was just like a dream job. I was always obsessed with Cannondale bikes. I thought they were so cool. Of course, like East Coast.
Mike's biting his tongue right now, but
Yeah. Hey, I work for Cannondale. I did work for
oh,
Cannondale back
that's
in,
right,
Yep, you
right.
did work for Cannondale. That's right.
yeah, in
Uh,
97. It was a long time ago. Joe Montgomery was still there, the founder, you know?
oh, Joe, that
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah.
Um, the 90s were a really cool time for Cannondale too.
They were.
Very,
Yeah.
very interesting time.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Wheelchairs and motorcycles, and it was
Wheelchairs,
wild.
motorcycles, also interesting mountain bikes. It was
Oh
just like
yeah.
pretty kind of ahead of its time in some ways.
Sure.
Tech wise, and innovation wise.
Yeah.
But when I landed the gig at Kendall, I was like, I actually like started crying because I was like, this is so cool.
Yeah.
And also I also felt there weren't a lot of people you see me and see like me in leadership roles in the bike industry, being a person of
Fair.
color, being queer. Um, and I felt like I brought a really unique perspective to the room. And everyone I worked with at Candale was just really unbelievably impactful. And I do believe everyone holds their own individual power in a room, particularly at brands, and everyone was so great. And I was able to do a lot of great work there. Going back to some of the stuff we talked about, why is cycling so white? That was a question that came up a lot right around that time where I was doing this work with Ride for Racial Justice in the summer and fall of 2020. And I was really honored to be part of the launch for this program at Cannondale that we did in partnership with EF, our World Tour team, uh, as well as USAC, USA Cycling, where we partnered with HBCUs and TCUs, historically black colleges and universities, and tribal colleges and universities to start their first ever collegiate cycling programs.
Oh.
And the idea behind that was when you look at a lot of the universities and institutions that do have robust collegiate cycling programs, they tend to be very white.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't see a lot of investment from brands, um, from governing bodies, from the community level in these institutions that are Black, Indigenous, or POC. And this was one way we thought, as a brand that has a lot of clout and power and um, investment, financial investment, that we could help. And it's something that's really cool and still lives to this day. So that was something I was able to be a part of the launch, and in addition to some other great work I did at Cannondale on the climate action and sustainability side. So yeah, that's a screenshot of my background of like this really pivotal moment in 2020 where I was doing some great work in my 9 to 5, and then also being able to see this opportunity where Marcus and Neil lended a branch out and said, hey, do you want to join us in what we're doing at this nonprofit organization on the ground? And I said yes, and it's grown from there.
Yeah.
But I think you touched on something, and so this was originally from the incident around George Floyd,
Correct.
right? So obviously the issue of racism and whatnot, it was, but ultimately your mission is to get more people of color on bikes, right? So
Right.
it's certainly about racial justice, but it's about accessibility to bikes, right? Narrowing the focus, if you will, a little bit. If that's terrible thing to say, but that's the point. It's not just awareness of racism per se, but it's like what McCasey's doing, getting more people on bikes, right?
100%, and that's what the ambassador program we have with Steamboat Gravel does. You look at an event like Steamboat Gravel, a lot of these great cycling events, they're all awesome. Like I said, Steamboat Gravel is so cool. Um, and going back to my earlier point, that's why I actually feel like, there's, of course, the gravel discipline is inclusive. Often a lot of people say gravel is the most inclusive when it comes to community.
Yeah.
We could argue as to like where that's going now as gravel is evolving, right?
Let's hope we don't lose sight of that. Let's hope it doesn't lose itself.
But I actually always felt too that crit when it comes to like, especially on the racing scene, like crit racing was always, I felt like, really diverse and inclusive in the sense that, crit racing, you see a lot of crit racing happening in cities. Cities tend to have more diversity and representation.
Yeah.
When you look at, the crit scene, which we could also have a whole separate podcast episode as to where the crit scene's going in the country.
Yeah.
But, and all the drama and turbulence there. But at its foundation, crit racing does focus a lot on urban areas. Urban areas tend to have more diversity and representation, and that's why you do see a lot of diversity and representation on the crit scene. And then you look at gravel in its ethos and its foundation is the idea behind the whole gravel movement was for it to be inclusive and community focused, right? Where anyone could hop on a bike and ride on an open road and find others to do that with. But a lot of these gravel events take place in parts of the country that are really hard to get to, that are really expensive to get to.
Yes.
Steamboat, as fantastic as an event it is a really expensive place to get to and stay for a weekend. But we also, wanted to start figure out, like, how do we break down the barriers and bring more cyclists of color to a place like Steamboat? And that's what the ambassador program was, where not only is it working with Amy Charity and her team to reserve spots for cyclists of color from the BIPOC community, but also we create a completely comprehensive program that at the time, in 2020 was pretty unique and first of its kind, where it offered, coaching support, mentorship, technical support, aka bikes if you need a bike, as well as your lodging, as well as airfare, everything. So it's a whole package to get you to Steamboat and breaks down all those barriers. And the biggest thing is like you can offer a spot, which you see a lot of races do now, of like, we're opening up the first 100 spots to women and people of color, or the queer community. But at the end of the day, there's still a lot of barriers to get there, and the spot doesn't just mean a spot. So being able to offer this comprehensive program that offers mentorship, coaching support, and everything really does break down those barriers to get folks to the start line. And we've seen our model now replicated, where you see so many race events and cycling events replicate our model. But I've also seen it actually in the running space, and at other events, which is really cool, seeing that this idea we had has now been something that's grown. And that was always the goal, is that it wasn't exclusive to us, that other race organizers would take note and be inspired by that and decide to do that. And you do see it, and it's really great.
Yeah. Might there be oh, go ahead, Dave.
how do you identify an ambassador? Like, how did you find out about Macassi as an example?
Yeah, so for example, like right now we have an application period that's open and we spread it far and wide. So applicants apply to the program, they create a video and answer some questions about, you know, their background, what they want to get out of the program, some of the work that maybe they've been doing on the ground before this. A lot of that isn't a prerequisite of you'll be selected, but uh you know, all that creates a formula where we come together as a team and vote. And our team is, you know, comes from the communities we seek to advocate for. So, you know, the Ride for Racial Justice Board is majority BIPOC. You know, over half of the board comes from the queer community as well. So we have a really good we have really good representation on our board to make these decisions when it comes to selecting who will be part of the program. You know, and the biggest thing for us is also that like folks like Mackenzie, who's a great example, and there's so many others over the past few years that are part of the ambassador program and are so touched and inspired by it that they go back to their own local community or their regional community and decide to do something similar, whether it's replicating it, whether it's creating an event on the ground, whether it's starting their own community rides, and we've seen that happen time and time again. And I definitely believe in, you know, this idea. My theory of change is that there's like micro change and macro change, and you know, macro change to me is, you know, attending a mass march at like, you know, Capitol Hill and DC and some of these big things. But often what you do see, you know, historically is that these big macro shifts often happen at due to a lot of these like micro movements. And we are a micro movement that is now been sprinkled all around this country. And that's where you see a lot of our alumni go out and do similar programming and similar work in their communities. And that's part of a bigger macro push. And, you know, I hope, you know, it might not be 10 years from now, it not might be 30 years from now, not might be, you know, 50 or 60 years from now. I do hope so. But I hope, you know, 50 years from now, there's another, I know podcasts will still be a thing, but I hope that, you know, someone like me or Marcus is or anyone else from our board is getting on a podcast and talking about like, look how far we've come.
Right.
And look how much all this micro change has led to this macro shift that's happened, you know, nationally and globally, you know, to break down these systems.
I do have a comment on that, but Mike, you had said, I cut you off earlier. You were.
Well, I mean, it's something that, you know, I work in the bike industry. I'm obviously someone who cares very much about the industry in general. And, you know, the disturbing trend really is on these group rides. You go to these group rides and we joke, it's a bunch of old white guys.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of diversity, what you're addressing, but there's also not a lot of young people getting into it. NICA has been great in that regard. You know, even like, you know, a lot of cyclists might have an opinion that's not so great about the BMX scene with the kids riding these wheelie bikes or whatever. But as someone who, you know, wants the best for the industry, I think that any movements getting young people engaged with bikes on any level, I think is so important because, yeah, it's just hard to cultivate it. And there's a lot of different distractions now, you know, socially with kids. It's, you know, they don't engage like like kids of an earlier generation. They're texting, they're playing video games or whatever. There's a lot of obesity is an issue. So, anything that we can do to open that door to somebody, whether it be somebody from the BIPOC community or otherwise, you know, just get them engaged in a healthy outdoor activity that you actually, and you do have to talk to people too when you ride bikes. So
100%, you know, I have like, I mean, and I'm a great example of that, of where I come from a community where that just wasn't nurtured. It just wasn't part of the culture. I have, you know, like vivid memories of just like the kids I grew up with when it came to like riding bikes or being active or being outdoors. There was this stigma where like, you know, you were like, oh, that's for white people. And I have like actual vivid memories of one kid saying that to me, and
Wow.
was just like, oh, Mas, that's for white people, you know. And so you're it's almost ingrained in your psyche that it's not something that maybe you deserve, or that it's something you should pursue because it's not meant for you. And I think it's because you didn't grow up with it, you know. And again, I'll compare
Mhm.
it to a place like Boulder that's very wealthy and very white. You know, it is, you're taught that this is part of your identity, this is part of your culture. You need to choose an activity to be outside in order to live in Boulder,
Yeah.
and you know, and have friends here. And that's not something you're taught where I come from. You know, you're
Yeah.
taught like work hard, try to get out of the system yet you're in. You know, a lot of the
Hmm.
kids I grew up with were immigrants. You know, working class, and your focus in life is to make more money than your parents did and find a way to help them if you make it. You know,
Yeah.
whatever odds are against you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
The
I
need for outdoor and adventure. I mean, if you think about the things that you've experienced just being outdoors, and there's these moments where,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they're just like incredibly humbling moments where whether it's the beauty of where you're at or the the weather sometimes can really rock you, and make you realize
Right,
like I'm just a little tiny little speck in the grand scheme of things,
right,
and there's a lot of value in that, I think, to, just make you realize like there's this little bubble that we all live in, but the
right.
world is just it's so much bigger than, and there's a lot to be gained from those experiences of adventure. And yeah, we want to get more
yeah,
people engaged in that for sure.
yeah, and
Absolutely.
that would be my hope, to be honest. I mean, where I live is I'm just going to say it's fairly affluent, privileged area, if you will, and uh, I'm the have-nots and the haves, you know.
Mhm.
But my the high school that my um, kids attended have a mountain bike program. The neighboring one has a mountain bike program,
Mhm.
but a lot of the other ones don't. Like
Hmm.
just a couple miles down the road. So, and the other ones that do, some of the ones that do, they're composite programs, so they're made up of a bunch of different high schools. And my point of saying that is that my hope would be what you guys are doing here filters out way beyond these racial boundaries, because to Mike's point, they're just like, again, a couple miles down the road, Cal High doesn't have a cycling program, and
Right.
and what they do, it's on mountain bike, and there's just no, it's just not a thing, and it should be. Why is it only football, soccer, and that? So hopefully, what you're doing just spreads, right, and
Well,
catches on, and then and
yeah, Massimo, you kind of alluded to it with your dad,
Mm.
right? Your father was, pushing you towards soccer, right?
Right.
And then,
Right.
but you had this love of the bike, so you had to like go. Not, I mean, I don't know how big a deal it was, but you had to basically go against his wishes, or at least do something that distracted from his goal for you, soccer. And I think so
Right.
much, there's a lot of that type of pressure with kids. I can't tell you how many guests we've had on the podcast where
Mhm.
they've said, "Oh yeah, my dad or my mom, they were not happy when I got into bikes," and it's
yeah,
weird, but I think it's because we grow up with cycling in America is not a real prevalent thing.
Right. Right.
Baseball, basketball, football,
yeah,
It's
soccer to a
true.
lesser degree, and so the
Yeah.
parents kind of envision their kid engaged in these activities, and they see maybe it's a path to school, or or just discipline, and they understand the game and they respect it, whereas cycling they don't really understand necessarily. So
Yeah.
that's
It's
changed.
yeah. I think that's such a great point, because you know, I've had the privilege to go to places like Belgium, and where it's ingrained in society,
Yes.
right? Like, you know, or where kids grow up with it, where cycling is robust, where it's like no matter what socioeconomic background you come from. Like cycling is a part of the culture just as much as like soccer is.
Yeah.
So I think like at a place like in the United States where cycling isn't a mainstream sport, so you for everyone, and then you take that and break it down, and then you go to like socioeconomically disadvantaged communities of color, and then you take that on an even further level where there's less acceptance of the sport, more barriers to access, and it's just you create like a culture where cycling isn't the thing, right? It's not the thing that most parents in this country want to push their kids into, unless you're from a place like Boulder, and it seems like every parent wants their kids to ride bikes. But
Right.
yeah.
Well, and you can see economically too in these challenged areas, basketball, soccer, those are two games where you just need a ball. You get a ball and you
100%.
and you can just become really good at it. So it doesn't take a lot of investment. It takes a lot of dedication and hard work, obviously, but it doesn't require financial input like a cycling would, or
the barrier to entry is pretty high.
It is.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I have and like going back to memories, my dad was part of a Hispanic soccer league growing up, and we're playing Flushing Meadows Park every weekend, and he'd bring me to the games. And funny enough, I have like memories of him just wearing like clapped out soccer cleats and just showing up in like, a cotton shirt and shorts. And that's all you really needed, was just like clapped out cleats, a shirt, shorts, and then you just play some pickup soccer with a bunch of folks. So like, there really isn't that much else to it, and you throw some cones on there and create a, like two posts, and then you have a game going, it's as easy as that.
You use your jacket or your sweatshirt, and that's the boundary, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so if somebody's listening to this and they're interested in possibly attending SPD Gravel with Ride for Racial Justice, you mentioned you have to create a video and submit it. When does that process start? Is that open year round, or is there like a deadline? You got to get it in by this date?
Yep, there's a deadline. Yep. So our deadline's coming up. So if you are interested, one, please go to rideforracialjustice.org. On our website, there's directions on how to apply. We also have it up on our social media page on Instagram. So find us on Instagram. It's just Ride for Racial Justice. It'll show you where to go, how to apply. Usually the application period runs a couple of weeks, somewhere around 3 weeks, in December.
Okay.
We usually close that right before Christmas, and then we announce those that have been selected in January, and then we dive right into orientation and the program, which goes from basically January all the way up until August. So that includes like our coaching program with Neil Henderson, who's a world-class coach, our mentorship program. This year we're launching something new, which is a mentorship program. So which makes this year's program really special and unique. So this year we're bringing back alumni from past years to be mentors for our new ambassador athletes. Right. So that's really cool, because often a lot of the new ambassadors have so many questions. A lot of them have never been to Steamboat before. They want to know what the course is like, how to handle nutrition, what's it like out there if you're riding the black course for 120 plus miles out in the middle of the high desert of Colorado in August. So there's so many questions, and also I think that is part of being part of the change, is giving an opportunity for our alumni to come back and be mentors, because it'll inspire them. They'll learn a lot through that process, and then still maybe go back to their communities and want to do something else and replicate this model. So this year's program is pretty special and unique. It's the first year we are launching this new mentorship program. And like I said, it's not year round. So the application period for next year's program usually opens in December for a period of 3 weeks or so. Applications come in. We select our ambassadors, and then we announce that in January, and then that program will run all the way until August. And then during the year, we do our other programming, which is our grassroots and community programming that we talked about.
Right.
So yeah, there's another thing. So you've got the ambassadors, right? So but there's going to be a finite number of those. But
Right.
if someone wants to get involved and participate in one of your rides, it's just a kind of it's there's a calendar. Just show up and do it. And I think that I will tell us where they find that information, because I think that's going to have a huge impact, especially. I mean, if someone attends that, then to your point, maybe they want to go back to their own community and try to do something and try to get a ride started or something to that effect. So,
Yep, it's same thing. It's on I'd say follow us on social media because that's the place to get information in real time. And then everything is also on our website. We might be launching a TikTok page soon, so that'll be fun for people to get more information too. Because TikTok's big and a lot of people use that more
For
than
sure.
Instagram these days. So, but the main places we post are on social media. So if you follow us there, you'll get everything in real time. And then of course everything's updated on our website as well.
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Where's the funding come from?
So, good question. At the start, it literally came from our own pockets and our grassroots fundraising. So, just fundraising at local rides, and it was tough the first 2 years because it was like we were in the red, and we like the board was putting our own personal money into keeping the
Yeah.
Yeah,
organization
yeah,
afloat.
yeah, yeah.
But fast forward, this just shows how much we've grown. We now last year have had our first brand partners. So, I brought Cannondale on to support Ride for Racial Justice during my Cannondale days, which was really great. When I left Cannondale just over a year ago, Cervelo stepped in, another part of the Pond bike family. So
Yep.
same, but different. So Cervelo's been a great partner, as well as SRAM. So a lot of our funding comes from these brand partners, Hunt Wheels. We now have Chamois Butter. Thule was a partner of ours last year. So we have like really, really, really amazing brand partners that have supported us financially and will continue to do so. And we're really grateful for that.
That's great.
Right.
Yeah. So we went from like, some of us tapping into our savings accounts to help the organization float to having Cervelo and SRAM and some of these other big partners. So we've come a long way.
Yeah. No
Yeah.
doubt. Well, it's got to feel really good too, doing something that you've been, passionate about, I would say most of your life, right? Feeling
Yeah.
part of this sense of not belonging, and then being able to provide a destination for others that may feel that way, and in some cases like a start, like McCasey was kind of already along with his
Mhm.
cycling journey, but he had never done a gravel event, and he didn't even have a bike. I think
Right.
he, if I'm not mistaken, I think he wrote, was it
He
Marcus?
wrote a serv.
With a Cervelo. Yep.
Yeah, it was
Yeah,
a
he wrote a
Cervelo.
serval.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but so he gets there, he gets a bike to use, and it goes out and has this experience that he chronicled very well. And so yeah, it's opening a lot of doors, and really helping people feel like they belong, and they do. Cycling
Yes.
is a very inclusive, what I shouldn't say very inclusive. I
No,
think cyclists are very inclusive in general. Like, I don't find a lot of uh bigotry or racism or anything like that. Like in the big groups of cyclists, they're really my experience has been they're really open, but it can be
Mhm.
very intimidating. We have a cyclist friend that she's super accomplished. She's
Mhm.
raced in the Olympics and everything, and I was surprised to learn that when she first started riding in the group ride,
Mhm.
she felt so intimidated. And
Mhm.
if anything, uh, you know, she's the one that carries all this, former Olympian and a professional cyclist, but still, I think it's just natural. Everybody feels intimidated on some level, but then if you add the BIPOC component to that as well, it adds another level where maybe it's even harder to break through. And so
Yeah.
I love what you're doing there at Ride for Racial Justice, and we're seeing those of us that are in the cycle, we're seeing a lot more engagement from people of color in the bike events. I did some cyclocross this year, and yeah, I hadn't done it in a couple of years, and the mix of people was just a lot different, and it was great to see. So
Yeah, we're seeing so much movement, particularly in the past few years. You look at just the past decade, the cycling industry and community has evolved so much. So I can only
yeah,
be hopeful that we'll see so much change in the next 10 years. We just have to keep pushing harder, demanding change, working, advocating for change, and having a voice in the room. And I really appreciate you guys for, being supporters of Right for Racial Justice, having me on and hearing about my experience
yeah,
and what we do at Right for Racial Justice, because, having anyone listen to this podcast, essentially, I want them to walk away feeling inspired, maybe learning something new
yeah,
or learning about an experience they haven't heard of before, and having that impact them to, as anything as small as like on their weekly, group ride, being like, how do we maybe invite more people and make this more welcoming to people that haven't been part of this before? Hey, there's just mainly a whole bunch of, like you said, a whole bunch of like middle-aged white
yeah,
guys. Yeah, how do we have more women show up, have more queer individuals show up, more individuals for the BIPOC community? Maybe we think we're inclusive, but maybe we're not extending that out and letting them know that this is a welcoming space for you too. And we want you here as well.
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I,
Well,
I, I can speak that it for the most part it isn't. That's that was always the DNA of my group rides out of my bike
Yeah.
shop, is that inclusion does matter and everyone is welcome, and that, and it's not, it needs to be that sentiment needs to be more pervasive
but
throughout the.
Mhm.
in fairness, though, Dave, it's similar to Boulder. That Danville is a largely white community. And, so when you have a group ride, that's what you're going to see.
Yeah.
I have the fortune of, in my job, I travel. So
Mm.
I spend a lot of time in the Sacramento region, down in the Fresno area. And yeah, those areas there's a lot more diversity in those areas than there are in our local scene here in the East Bay. But look, we're kind of up against it. We have to wrap it up, but
Yeah, yeah.
Massimo,
Damn, we're gonna have to have him back. Oh,
yeah,
darn it.
yeah. I joke that yeah, he's never going to want to come back on after he gets a load of our act, but
No way.
but
You guys are great. You guys are
yeah.
great.
Well, yeah, it's been great having you on, and we really appreciate what you're doing for the industry in general. And it's just cool. It's meaningful work, and I just love that it's starting to blossom the way that it has, and happy to shine a light on it.
Yes.
So you mentioned, if anybody's interested to get involved, check out rideforracialjustice.org, and
Yes.
you can see the group rides, the ambassador opportunity for this year. Realistically, probably a little late for our listeners, but if you heard
Yeah.
this and you're inspired, you've got a good 6-8 months to really put a package together, and then be ready for next year's opportunity if it's something that speaks to you and you'd like to be a part of. But
Yep, yep. And we're exploring, the last thing I'll say, and I know we have to wrap up, we are exploring expanding Right for Racial Justice beyond Steamboat Gravel to other events who have reached out to us in different
great,
parts of the country. So look out for that too, because Steamboat Gravel has been a great partner and will continue to be a great partner, but we also want to bring our model to some other events as well. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity to do that. So
great.
stay tuned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would love to see something with the sea otter out here in
Mhm.
Monterey. It's like the industry kickoff event. It's
Yes.
a huge media, because of that effect, and it would be great to see Ride for Racial Justice there. I think that could really help expand the audience,
Yeah.
and make more people aware. So if you can get out for sea otter, that'd be amazing. All right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's wrap it up. I do want to say this is the last podcast of the year for us. So
Oh,
We're
wow.
closing it out in style with Massimo here.
I'm honored. I'm honored.
Yes, and
Going
we
out with
do
a bang.
want to say we appreciate the audience very much. Everybody following along, we appreciate you and all your comments and support of the program. It's really yeah, so we appreciate it so much. And
Yeah.
Dave and I love doing this, bringing stories like Massimo's to light. Gives us great satisfaction, and we couldn't do it without you. So thanks for listening. If you
Happy
want to
holidays and Happy New Year.
Yes, that too. If you do want to support the podcast, you can go to cyclejerkspodcast.buzzsprout.com, hit the subscribe button. And if you like what you're listening to, feel free to leave us a good review on whatever streaming platform you're on. All right. And with that, we're going to say goodbye.
Peace.
Goodbye.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again. Yep. Happy
Thank
holidays,
you.
everybody.